With the recent Jujutsu Kaisen chapter making such a big splash on the anime community as a whole, I thought it would be an interesting topic to talk about. Gojo, since the beginning of Jujutsu Kaisen, has become one of the most beloved anime characters in the history of anime and manga. So with his death in the latest chapter, many people have their own opinions on him as a whole, even with some saying that chapter 236 has ruined him as a whole. I'm here today to explore this chapter and Gojo's character to explain why I think Gojo's conclusion in this chapter is actually a perfect end for him and his character. First, we should look at the major criticisms of the chapter as well as Gojo himself and who he is. The first criticism I heard was that Gojo's actual death was off screen, which feels like a disservice to the biggest fight of the manga, which has been foreshadowed since the third chapter. Now, I actually agree with this criticism. It did feel very jarring considering the ending of the previous chapter 235. Gojo had just completed 4 black flashes back to back while also defeating Mahoraga using Hollow Technique Purple. Sukuna, the King of Curses, had felt fear and tension for the first time in a millennium, and was in shambles after Gojo's attack. Meanwhile, Gojo, still on his black flash high, and operating at 120% of his potential, had his reverse curse technique output back. It was a very hard turn that I felt like was done to match the anime displaying Gojo being sealed in the prison realm. It is possible, now I'd probably even say probable, that Gege is going to go more in depth with Gojo's death in the following chapter, but from a weekly reading perspective, I would say it's still very jarring. Gojo going from being on top straight to him in the afterlife giving a post-fight interview with Geto is kind of funny looking back after I've digested the whole entire chapter. I wouldn't say this ruins the chapter for me personally, but I do think it's a valid criticism of the chapter as a whole. Now we move on to the next criticism, which is based on Gojo's character and dialogue in the chapter. The first is the glazing Gojo does for Sukuna while in the afterlife or purgatory with his former Jujutsu High classmates. Gojo starts by saying Sukuna was crazy strong and that he didn't even go all out. This in itself recontextualizes the entire fight as Sukuna wasn't using his own techniques and wasn't able to use all of his abilities. While it does change the whole entire perspective of the fight with Sukuna using the 10 shadows to adapt to Limitless on purpose, it doesn't ruin the chapter for me as it is hype for the main villain of the manga going forward. This is the guy that beat the strongest character in the manga that we knew for 235 chapters. So it's overall good for the manga that we can respect Sukuna for defeating Gojo. It may feel like a lie due to our feelings while reading the chapters weekly, but in hindsight we can see Sukuna's planning and goal throughout the whole entire fight. Like Sukuna saying Gojo is a nameless fish and I'll peel off his scales, which is a reference to his infinity. Or the cast saying that as soon as Sukuna rids Gojo of his infinity, Gojo will lose the fight. Sukuna even telling Mahoraga that he wasn't showing him what he wanted to see, and Sukuna's reaction to Mahoraga cutting the space Gojo existed within as limitless, tells us that this was truly thought out by Gege before he even properly started the fight. We weren't told a lie, but we were definitely led on, which is why I feel like a reread of the whole entire fight is required to completely understand it. Gojo goes on to say that he's not sure if he could have defeated Sukuna even if he didn't have Megumi's 10 shadows. Which is a pretty controversial statement as this is the question that was posed to us, the audience, in chapter 3. Who will win in a fight, Heianera Sukuna or Satoru Gojo? This is likely Gege Akutami having Gojo give Sukuna his flowers due to him realizing that Sukuna was holding back while using Megumi's 10 shadows, meaning Gojo doesn't even know Sukuna's real combat kit. Gojo during the fight even questions why Sukuna is leaning so hard on not using his own techniques and relying on his domain's attacks. Because we don't know the full applications of Sukuna's shrine or his box technique, we can't really make a proper judgment on Heianera Sukuna versus Gojo, which is likely purposely done by Gege so we continue to argue about who would really have won. So overall, it makes sense for Gojo to be unsure about how his fight with another Sukuna that he didn't really fight would go, as the entire fight would be completely different. Another thing is Gojo saying all of these things can seem pretty abnormal, all things considered, but we have to realize that ever since his awakening against Toji, Gojo went unrivaled. To us, it may characterize him as cocky or arrogant, which I would say he does still retain those type of qualities, but in reality it was just Gojo appropriately describing situations or himself. When Gojo says that he is the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer in chapter 2, that is him just stating a fact. Gojo in the Hidden Inventory arc, when faced with something he cannot overcome with his overwhelming physical strength, is able to recognize that him being strong will not always be enough to solve every individual problem he comes across. He knows that he cannot do everything, which is one of the reasons Gojo wishes to foster strong allies. He also doesn't believe he's so much above others that there isn't anyone who can catch up to him. He believes there will be others like him in the future that are at his level. Gojo was also even capable of recognizing Sukuna was capable of defeating him during their battle as well. So Gojo's never actually been so cocky or arrogant that he was unable to recognize things that are true or verifiable in front of him. And Sukuna defeating him in combat would obviously make Gojo go to the conclusion that, oh, this guy is stronger than me. Gojo goes on to talk about the connections between solitude and absolute strength before admitting inferiority to Sukuna once again, saying that he is glad he didn't die to old age or illness, but to someone who was stronger than him. This leads into another big criticism of the chapter involving Nanami's statements about Gojo's character and the implications of what he is saying about Gojo. Nanami says that Gojo lives for Jujutsu and that he doesn't do it to help or protect people. He does it because it satisfies him as a person. Geto supports this by saying Gojo just proved him right, with this whole dialogue about Sukuna and his feelings about the fight in general. The implication drawn from this is that Gojo only cares about himself and not the students he's been fostering up the entire story, as well as the rest of his allies that have gathered to fight Kenjaku and Sukuna. The problem I have with this is that these ideas are not mutually exclusive. They both can exist at the same time. We know this is actually Nanami's view of Gojo as opposed to Gojo's own view of himself. Nanami knew Gojo the most when they were teens at Jujutsu High, but Nanami ends up leaving after Haibara's death, which is about a year or so after Gojo's awakening. Gojo during this teenage part of his life hated protecting the weak and was not even in support of applying reasoning or responsibility to his Jujutsu. Nanami returns to the Jujutsu world after already being an adult and having a stable job. He's consistently thought this about Gojo's character's entire life as he compares him to Mahito in chapter 22. The whole point of Gojo's character is that because of this loneliness that comes from his strength, no one can really understand him, which is likely the reason he didn't try to correct anybody about his character. The whole point is that they would never be able to understand. This next part is my personal interpretation of the chapter, but I'll explain it thoroughly. After Gojo asks Nanami about how his death was, he explains that Mei told him that when leaving the country, if you want to start anew, go north, and if you want to return to your old self, you should go south. Nanami describes how he went south without hesitation, as he bet everything on the future in that moment. Gojo smiles, saying he understands, before he yells to Principal Yaga, "Wasn't there supposed to be no such thing as sorcerers dying without any regrets?" Now, I believe that Gojo agreed with Nanami's feelings about his own death, about betting everything on the future, which in this case are the students he fostered during his time as a teacher, which would make sense as the title of the chapter is actually Heading South, implying Gojo had the same feeling as Nanami about his own death, meaning Gojo actually did care about his own students, while also being that selfish, battle-hungry, sadistic person he always was, which is evidenced by his facial expressions, his attitudes, and actions he took while he was fighting the disaster curses in Shibuya. One of them being neglecting Jogo, threatening to kill civilians in favor of him killing Hanami. This is all really reminiscent of Goku from Dragon Ball, who is a kind person at heart, but he's still very battle hungry at the same time, which adds a lot of nuance to his character and the decisions he makes throughout the story. I want to include a quote about Goku by Akira Toriyama, as I believe it also could apply to Gojo. There's how, basically, Son Goku from Dragon Ball doesn't fight for the sake of others, but because he wants to fight against strong guys. So once Dragon Ball got animated, at any rate, I've always been dissatisfied with the righteous hero type portrayal they gave him. I guess I couldn't grasp the elements of poison that slip in and out among the shadows. Even in Dragon Ball, there are obvious moments where Goku is fighting for good reasons, like against the Saiyans in the Saiyan arc, or Frieza in the Frieza saga. But overall, he, like Gojo, fights because he enjoys combat. This doesn't mean he can't be a good person, but overall, these are the type of people that they both are. It also adds nuance to a lot of their decisions in the story, such as Goku letting Vegeta go at the end of the Saiyan arc, purely because he wanted to fight him again. In the Jujutsu Kaisen fanbook, there are character sections for every major character. Within these sections, questions are asked about specific characters that Gege Akutami themselves answer. In Gojo's section, there are 2 questions that I want to focus on. I'll say the question and answer for both questions back to back, with the translations on screen. Question: why did he go meet Megumi after hearing about him from Toji? Answer: to recruit a powerful individual. Question 2: why did he offer to help problem children like Okotsu and Itadori? Answer: because they're powerful, so he doesn't care about the other details. Even in these decisions, Gojo displays there's nuance to his decision making. He helped all these individuals because they had potential or were powerful, yet we know he was attached to them. He himself said, despite his feelings of loneliness, he loved everyone. Gojo can be this selfish battle junkie while also caring about people as a whole. A part of the reason I like Goku and Gojo is because they're nuanced and they're not always morally righteous in every way. Those were like most of the major criticisms I saw of the chapter, and I actually used to share most of them before I sat down and reread the fight and properly digested 236. Gege making me feel emotion about a manga I'm reading says a lot about his ability to write manga just as a whole. The entire fight was pretty amazing, especially with us as fans reading week to week, making memes, fraud Kuna, stuff like that. Even just jokes and even just having agendas in general. I feel like this is a beautiful conclusion to Satoru Gojo as a character, the one who no one could understand or even physically touch, finally having that barrier around him cut down by someone who's stronger than him, and being able to know in his last moments that he is not the strongest, but he is Satoru Gojo, as Sukuna addresses him, while he says he will never forget him for as long as he lives, which Gojo, dying on the ground, smiles to. So yeah, that's the first Jujutsu Kaisen video I've ever made on the channel. Depending on this video does, I'll probably make more. I have like one or two I want to make anyway, so I might just make those even if this video doesn't do well. But if this video does do well, I'll probably just add JJK to the lineup along with One Piece. But yeah, I'm always gonna still make One Piece videos, but I also might make JJK videos because I like the series and it's popular and stuff. So yeah, see you guys next time.